Welcome to this episode of Candid Leadership. My guest today is Chevy Cook. And before we get started, I just want to say how wonderful it is for you to share your time with me here today. It's been quite a journey thus far, and I love being able to talk about leadership and mentorship. So thank you for spending your time today with Candid Leadership. Chevy Cook is our guest, and he is also the co-founder of Military Mentors. His organization maintains expertise in workplace mentoring, highlighting military approaches and veteran engagement. This organization focuses on combining both the art and the science of mentoring. Before diving into Military Mentors, I'd like to highlight more on my guest, Chevy Cook, who is an active duty officer finishing his doctoral degree at Tufts University. A long-serving member of the Special Operations community, Chevy started his career in the historic 82nd Airborne Division and has served the majority of his career at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He also served as both a tactical officer and Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership instructor at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Thank you so much for being a guest on Candid Leadership. Could you please tell me a little bit more about Military Mentors?
So yes, thanks for having me today. I love to talk about this little doohickey I have on the side called Military Mentors. Military Mentors is a nonprofit that I got the chance to start about 5 years ago with the mentee of mine, actually. His name is Jim Perkins. And in the kind of big picture scheme of things, Military Mentors focuses on elevating, educating, and facilitating mentorship for those in the military and beyond. So we picked those three words very specifically, elevating meaning, hey, we want to bring mentorship to the fore. We want to elevate its importance within an organization, be it military or not. We picked educating because we focus on the art and the science of mentoring and not just telling war stories. And we chose the word facilitating because we want to be able to help organizations, again, be it civilian or military, facilitate mentor programs and mentoring relationships within their organization in order to improve leader development and leadership development as well. With regard to the last piece for the military and beyond, I'm still active duty. Members of my team are as well. Obviously, we want to focus on improving the military mentorship, but we also say beyond because there's lessons that can be learned from military leadership, from military organizations, from military backgrounds that can readily translate over to the civilian sector. And we like to bring those to the fore when we get the chance to consult or partner with civilian organizations.
I think that's awesome, and I'm always giving a big thumbs up to those military members out there doing the hustle. So it's kind of a side business for you. What have you learned from that?
Oh man, I've learned a lot of different things. One, we are an all-volunteer organization, right? These are people who, all my wonderful teammates who work with me, they have something else they're doing that is their main method of sustaining themselves and their family. So the time that they put into this organization is all on their own time, right? It's all on their own effort, their own passion, their own purpose, their own thoughts around what it means to develop and invest in others. So I've learned a lot about leading volunteers, leading people who can walk away at any moment. So I wear rank in the military, and I'm always in an assigned position. As an officer, I'm always in a position of leadership. Even when I'm on staff, the people who are around me usually have to listen to me, especially as you get older in the military, like I have, luckily. So it's a big difference between walking in a room, having the rank on your chest, and people automatically listening to you because you're ranking your position, and then coming into a volunteer organization like this, where they're not going to listen to my rank or my position. They got to believe in what we're trying to do.
Right.
And if at any time that conflicts with whatever else they have going on in their life, they can step away and they don't owe me anything. And I don't owe them anything either, but it's taught me so much about different styles and types of leadership. The one last thing I would say about something, and I've learned a lot, but one other big lesson for me is the importance of having expertise. So again, going back to my military background, a lot of people just kind of give you respect because you've been there and done that, right? You've been in so long that you got to know this stuff. But if you have these other kind of niche experiences, they just kind of go off of your time as opposed to, hey, I have this degree, or I've done this level of study, or I have these other things going on. It kind of adds like, oh, we just want you to be a military guy. And a lot of times I've found that senior leaders sometimes, because you're quote unquote junior, even if you're a more senior leader, sometimes general officers, for example, if you're a lowly captain or major, they kind of, even if you have these niche experiences, sometimes they may not want to hear what you're bringing to the table because you don't have 30 years of service or 40 years of service. However, in this nonprofit space, where people are simply, oh, you do this and you know that, the door has been swung wide open for CEOs of major companies, for general officers who, oh, by the way, all of a sudden, when I step away from a uniform and I have on a suit and tie, all of a sudden that expertise is more important or more advantageous, or maybe it just sounds a different way when it's not coming from, my rank and my position. So I've learned that having a platform is important, and having the experience that goes along with that platform is important. And just doing good work out there will build that platform and will garner you some respect that you might have not had in other cases.
And that's totally true. I really dug into what you do and the fact that you're so incredibly positive about youth development. We are in such a highly structured kind of world that we live in the military. And that's what I love about Candid Leadership in this podcast, is that we kind of open the door towards people in whatever area of national security, intelligence, military they're at, but to look at, hey, you can learn all sorts of incredibly valuable lessons, even by doing something like volunteering. I love the start of your story and how you started this organization. Of all things, it harkens all the way back to when you were a B squad leader. Could you tell me a little bit more about this?
Oh, yes, of course. So Jim and I. So here I am. I'm a graduate of West Point, and anybody who goes through West Point has to do a summer detail. You don't get summers off, right? You have to do a leadership position for your summertime as a graduation requirement, but it also helps you learn about leadership. And this was a role I stepped into the summer of 2002. I was going to be what is a beast squad leader. So that means this is a cadet basic training, small unit leader that is, right at the ground level, right there with the incoming, what are called new cadets before they become plebes. So these fresh off the street, just got their hair shaved, you're receiving them as they come into the Corps of Cadets. And I was in charge of static drill. That was my duty station that day. So I'm teaching people how to salute and how to stand at attention and parade rest and those kind of simple, just stationary positions, not teach them how to march or anything. Just, hey, can you do stuff at a still position?
So pretty much you taught him how to stand. Sorry, Jim, if you're listening to this. He taught you as an adult male how to stand. See, isn't that great? You can learn anything on a leadership podcast. How to stand up straight. All right, so you're teaching Jim, and?
So I'm teaching, well, I'm paying attention to the people who are going through that are going to be assigned to my actual squad, right? So I'm making note that I'm teaching everybody in the company these positions, but I'm taking particular note, okay, that person's in my squad. Jim was the guy who I believe saluted with the wrong hand, and I had to move his hand down and use this hand. And I was like, oh my God, he's got on these big glasses. He's skinny and just kind of looks nerdy, and he's saluting with the wrong hand too. So I just made note of that. Fast forward, as I was leaving the summer, they're going to go off to the different academic year company. I said, just keep in touch with all of them. I just said, hey, I'm not going to be in your cadet company. That's how it kind of works sometimes. But if you want to talk, let's talk. And Jim was one of the guys that did that.
Awesome.
And not only did he do that first year, he continued to. When I became an upperclassman, he was like, hey, what is it like? What major should I pick? And then when I graduated, was in the Army, and he was still a cadet. He was like, hey, what's it like being out in the Army? And then when he came in the Army and I deployed first, he was like, what is it like being in combat? And it just kind of kept rolling forward, right? When I got married, the same questions arose. And then eventually, about 10 years in, he was like, we had never been assigned at the same place. We had never been in the same unit. I was never his raider or anything like that. He simply asked, why am I having these conversations with you and not anyone else in my organization? And I said, I don't know, Jim, but I'm glad to have him with you. Fast forward a couple more years, he was at Georgetown getting his degree. And he felt so passionate about this problem he had seen that he was like, you know what? I'm gonna start an organization. Chevy, will you mentor me through this process of getting busier with my life? And as I was kind of, giving him some tips and tricks, all of a sudden he was like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. I should be asking you to co-found this thing with me and not ask you to help me figure out, what I should do with it. So that was the genesis of it. And he's still around. He's now the president of our board of advisors.
That's phenomenal. I mean, talk about a mentorship win. Wow. And it's continued to this day. And what's great is it's formed something totally different and totally new. And, that really, to the best way that I can, sing your highest praises to the both of you for kind of demonstrating not only how mentorship works, but what you can do with the fruitful mentorship. I mean, this organization that you started, Chevy, is all because of this. So, Chevy, when I really started talking about military mentors, I talked that you combined both the art and the science. Now, a lot of organizations, and I may even be guilty of that, when talking about mentorship, I talk about relationships and discussion, discourse, conversations, communicating. And a lot of that is kind of the artistry side of building. But I want to look at why you talk about the science. And could you kind of focus me a little bit more on how I could take some of the mentorship efforts that I do and those that I advise others? Why do you focus on the science?
I think at the very baseline level, we focus on the science because there is so much art and there's so much experience that comes with people just living and growing, and being in organizations for a long time. So it's easy to just say, you know what, I was sitting where you were at one point, right? And let me
Right,
tell you,
right.
let me help you get through that moment. So there's a lot of art out there and a lot of experience out there. I personally think that it's not being completely leveraged unless it's through a structured, programmatic, data-based background, edification that provides this kind of not like a rigid, forceful structure, but just, hey, this stuff is backed by empirical studies and we know this stuff works. Add that to your story or figure out where the science is actually already in your story so you can then, figure out which pieces of the science you are lacking in and have strength in so you could pick one up and put one down. So let me give you a very simple example of what I talk about with regard to the science. We parse out the difference between leader development and leadership development. I used those phrases earlier, and people kind of, I think, integrate those two. Well,
Right.
here's how the science, the research would say that there's research out there, and some of this is from the Center for Creative Leadership down there in North Carolina. They would say that leader development is working on someone's individual knowledge, skills, abilities, right? That's you being a leader. That's me being a leader. However, leadership development, the practice of leadership, is about taking those knowledge, skills, and abilities and putting them into practice. So leadership development will be building someone's socio-emotional capacity to interact with another. Margaret Rios is an organizational developmentalist that once said, if you are not being followed, you are thusly not a leader. So you can have great KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities, great leader
That's right.
abilities, and never be able to put them into place because you don't have the social emotional capacity. And we all know the importance of things like emotional intelligence nowadays, right? The ability to differentiate between the two. And as a mentor, within a mentor-mentee relationship, if you notice that someone's leader capacities are where they need to be, then the focus of your mentorship should be on those leadership components and vice versa. Another one is Kathy Cram has done a bunch of work. She's seen as matriarch of mentorship. She works here in Boston. She's a full professor here in Boston. She would parse out the differences between career factors with regard to mentorship and psychosocial factors. So the career factors would be stuff with the things that you think. It would be focusing on those aspects that happen that allow a person to progress along in their career. The psychosocial components are like those leadership development components that a mentor is talking to a mentee about, giving them affirmation and making them psychologically safe and making them feel good about their progress. Those are two different kind of approaches there that as factors need to be addressed. Most of these developmental relationships actually start in the career kind of set.
Right.
They build toward the psychosocial. But if you don't notice that you have moved on or have not yet moved on to the psychosocial side of things, then again, you're not getting your return on investment with time. That's why this science is important. Now, some of us might hear just the simple lingo that I've used, leadership, career versus psychosocial, and say, oh, that's so intuitive. But guess what? If you hadn't heard that science before, hadn't had it encapsulated in that manner, then you may not notice what's actually going on in your relationship. And oh, by the way, if you run an organization, you're leading a large organization, and you are trying to implement these programs, your programs have to address all of these areas. That's why the science is important.
That's why I'm so glad your organization exists, because so many times I talk to, mid-grade leaders or organizational managers, and they'll oftentimes say, well, it's almost like I keep telling them how I got where I'm at, and they never really get to the next step. They never feel that push forward. And my response is typically, well, you're trying to build a duplicate of yourself, and no one can fill your shoes. No one can follow your path forward. And I think that's what's so creative and great about what you do is you go into organizations. We've talked about this in the past. It's almost like going into an organization, holding up a mirror and taking a marker and drawing a path forward. But that person, they still have to reflect back. They're always going to see themselves. And you have to pull that other person in the mirror with them. You're looking at both faces together. And I think that ability that you do in your organization with volunteers, no less. How awesome is that? I think you are creating a better group of leaders through mentorship, and you do that very well. How do you do that, though? Let me take it a little step forward. When you talk about teams and you're starting to talk to an organization about building better leaders, building teams, what are some of the things that you talk to about leader development?
Going back to a point you just made, one of the first things we like to talk about is getting them to understand that you made the point yourself. Cloning was bad in Star Wars, so cloning is bad in your own organization. This isn't about getting someone from their point A to your point B. This is about getting them from their point A to their point B, right? So understanding these individual pathways is very, very important. So we try to get them to really, at the onset, understand what this context means, how it means to really focus on somebody's idiosyncratic, or if we really want to get technical, idiographic, which is idiosyncrasy over time, their pathway, and really focusing in on that specific person within a specific context, within a specific time frame. Now I'm quoting Bornstein's specificity principle, more science, right? We try to get them to understand those things so they really hone in. So we start with stuff like getting better at self-assessments for mentees and leaders and for proteges and everybody else in the organization as well. So it starts with this self-awareness. Where are you? Do you really want to develop your junior talent? Who are you and where are you at? All right. And then we try to help organizations see what it means to be an individual that's at a lower level and help them see what it means to be who they are and what they want to accomplish as well. Then we start talking about, well, what do you actually want to do? Because there's mainly two type of interventions you can do with regard to building organizations up with regard to developmental processes, specifically around mentorship. So we start talking about, okay, do you want to do structural interventions or educational interventions? Spoiler alert, you want to do both. But where do you want to start, right? Structural interventions are simply, hey, do you want to actually build a mentor program? Do you actually want to have a set number of days that you want to meet? Do you want to have workbooks, webinars, workshops? Those are all kind of structural interventions. Structural interventions can also be something like, hey, we want to actually move where people work, change water cooler locations, for example, so junior leaders and senior leaders have more time to simply walk past each other and start conversations.
That's fantastic. That's awesome.
Educational interventions on the other side are what we know more of. Educational
Mhm.
interventions are, hey, we're going to come in, we're going to actually give you the curricula so you can develop, let's talk about the differences between teaching, coaching, and mentoring. Let's talk about the differences between leader development and leadership development. So everybody has the same language. So we don't actually have to be there as translators once we give this initial packaging. So we really like to focus on those kind of areas. The idea that you can't clone, the idea that there's a lot of self-assessment and self-awareness that has to happen. And then these ideas around, okay, if you really want to build out your team and make teams stronger, let's focus on some of these structural interventions and these educational interventions.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. And I hope listeners, you understand it's not just a book club. Mentorship is so much more than sometimes what we just in our mind's eye, we may have had some kind of bad mentorship experiences. And that's why I love this organization and Chevy here today, because he's really talking to you about how you can be involved in mentorship in many different ways, from kind of where you have conversations when you're walking in and out of your cubicles, obviously with masks up nowadays, but also how you can take that and help someone really plan their path forward. Now, Chevy, as you're very aware, I'm involved in mentoring both kind of at a large breadth and depth of individuals, but I do have a special place in my heart in a field of work that we must continue to retain talented women. So we've talked about this in the past. What are some of the things that we should kind of focus on? And who should we look to as some of those experts in the field that we should dive into? Those of us who are mentors or those mentees who they are looking up to staying in their workforce when they feel right now, especially like the whole world is crumbling down around them.
So I'm glad you asked that question because I was in an organization back in November. I was at a place with a lot of military members, and we were having this discussion around, what it means to do mentorship. And, this large organization was looking at potentially crafting a program. And we went through the whole talk. I talked for about 60 minutes. And there was a young female captain in the room, because this is an Air Force organization. The captain raised her hand and she said, "This all sounds well and good, but this is a room full of men. And what do I need specifically? What can my leaders, I don't have any senior women leaders in my life. What can these men in here do to help understand where I'm coming from?" Because so often I just have to work with male senior leaders and they don't seem to get me or understand me. On the vice versa, if you have any suggestions where I can maybe understand how I can better inform my mentors, I would really appreciate it. And I was like, oh man, this is a perfect question because I know something that I'm about to share now. So I would suggest that people get a book called Athena Rising, and it's by Dave Smith and Brad Johnson. I am lucky enough to know them both. I know I'm a little bit closer to Brad Johnson, and we have joked back and forth. I have a signed copy of that book and have passed that book around a lot because it gets into the details of why men should mentor women and how to actually do it, right? And how the conversation can go back and forth between the genders and how we can understand each other for the purposes of leader development. The best thing about the book is they don't pull any punches. Like it's straight telling, for men, it's telling men to get over themselves, okay? If you can't have a professional relationship with a woman because you're scared about what the ramifications may be within your home life, that's something more about you than the person you're trying to mentor, is what they would say,
Exactly.
okay? They
Yep.
also have a brand new book out called Good Guys, same authors. That's an advanced version, maybe I could call it that.
Yeah, it's been released, but I'm going to harp on Athena Rising and why that's so good to this audience, especially those of you in national security, anybody in the military. I don't care if you're a man, woman, child, grandparent. This book is awesome. And well, it'll only be as awesome when your book comes out, Chevy. But just as awesome as you're working on your PhD. But why these gentlemen do such a great job explaining? And I highlighted that book and shouted yes multiple times while I was reading it.
Yes, that book is so great. One of the things it focuses on for me was really good is this idea. So I don't like the term cultural competence. I like to use cultural humility. Like you can't know everything about a culture unless you're in it. And even if you're in it, you don't really know everything about the culture that you're in. It's just there's so many little subtle nuances when you go from place to place, right?
Right.
So it'd be hard to be culturally competent in another context. They talk about gender humility, right? Having the humility to really try to understand somebody's experience. I've been with the same woman for 22 years since high school. We were teenagers when we first got together. We have 2 children now. We've been married for 14 years. We've been through all kinds of different things, different colleges, deployments, all that good stuff. I will tell you right now, if during one of her pregnancies, she had, been complaining about her back or something hurting. And I was like, you know what? That time I road marched 30 miles with this heavy pack on my back. I know exactly how you feel, babe. I would not be married today. My wife would have cut me in that moment. She'd have been very mad about that. No, that's not. There's no equivalence there, even though I would be trying to be sympathetic in that moment. What would be more showing some gender humility there would be for me, which I think I actually did in a moment, would be for me to try to understand actually what she's going through, what the pain is like, and sit down and talk with her. You can do that same thing, not necessarily talking about pregnancy, but talk about these issues with someone of another gender that you're trying to mentor. That could be male or female, but either way, I'm just trying to understand the perspective, really trying to get
Right.
into what has happened here. And we're not talking about if it gets to the point where you can share maybe some trauma or something, maybe you do have a deep enough relationship to do that. I'm not just talking about that. I'm just talking about simple differences on what happens in the office space, in the workspace, in the professional space, being open enough to say, okay, I haven't experienced that, but maybe I did it.
Right. Almost to celebrate the fact that it's okay to be different. I used to joke all the time, Chevy, when I was pregnant, and, we'd talk about what have you done for your country? And I couldn't believe I would always be it was a little sad, when we talk about pregnant soldiers and people will say, oh, well, they're kind of away on the system, non deployable. I have to mark this stuff down. And I used to joke, I've been in organizations that celebrated when people were pregnant and had a baby, and how awesome it is to be in an organization like that versus one where you feel like you're weighing them down. I was unfortunately in an organization, and it appeared as if I was weighing the organization down being pregnant. And I kept saying, I'm creating another American inside of me. What have you done for your country today? Please ask yourself that. And when you look, when you kind of look at their perplexed face, it's really how awesome is it that I'm going to be a part of this great American family that was forthcoming? So you talked about humility. And of course, when we drop this episode, it will be after Navy's humble defeat after the Army-Navy game. Let's fingers crossed. And Brad and David both teach for the Naval Academy, or at one time did. So I want to throw a shout out to them. Thank you so much for Athena Rising. Despite it being from the Naval Academy, go Army, beat Navy. So let's transition because I can't tell any more Navy jokes, but I do love you guys. There's only one day of the year. And shout out to our Air Force and Coast Guard and Marine and all of our services and all of our national security listeners out there. Thank you for what you do. Kind of as we've gone through this tumultuous year, we've talked in the past about some of the problems that you've seen in the workforce and dealing with that. And so, how do you see some of the problems that are starting to percolate with respect to, humbly asking, with respect to culture? And how would you kind of face that?
I have a unique background in history that maybe we can get to on another podcast. But if you look my name up, Chaveso Cook, you can see some times that I've talked about some of my background. You can find podcasts and stuff on YouTube as well about that. And that background has put me in a position, especially as a minority leader, to have these discussions. So our organization put out a message on the Monday after a Memorial Day weekend addressing the specific instance of George Floyd's death and the ramifications that were happening across the country. And we jumped into that social justice discussion because the way, as an executive director of this nonprofit, I define these challenges, they're leadership challenges.
Right.
Point blank, okay? And I would even go, this might be a little far, but I would go to as far as saying all isms, genderism, ageism, sexism, racism, these are all the isms are a leadership challenge. And let me explain why. They're leadership challenges at two levels. The first level is leadership of the self. If you are well attuned to who you are, if you are self-aware, you know that we all naturally have biases, right? We all have these biases. They come from heuristics and algorithms within our body. That's the science behind it. That's just how we are wired. And it helps us make sense of the world where we don't have to put a whole lot of brain power toward it. Now, when you get lazy and tired or unscrupulous, then your biases creep out and they affect other people. Okay. So that's where the leadership problem is a challenge, a problem of self. If you have certain biases or certain beliefs that you cannot control and they are affecting other people in a negative way, you're actually failing yourself. That's a position where you cannot lead self. You can't lead the person in the mirror because you can't get beyond your own biases. That's the first level. The second level is very simply an organizational level of leadership failure. Very clearly, it's policies, procedures, memos, rules, values, mission, intent, vision, all of that stuff is not put together well or not even existent in your organization. So for example, you can really lead yourself well. I understand me, I'm self-aware, I know who I am, and I have my own values. But you go to work, and as a leader of an organization, you haven't put anything into place that addresses racism, that addresses your hiring system, that addresses your promotion system, that addresses, I don't know, mansplaining in your organization or whatever it may be, then you have failed. The organization is now failing, even though you can lead self. It comes out in an interesting way, I think. Put it back in the military context, right after 9/11, all of a sudden we had this great policy, this great idea that we still have today, championed by the Department of Homeland Security. If you see something, say something. All right, it's real simple policy, real simple value set there, right? And we can go into a subway, we can go into the airline, we can go in any public place. And man, if a bag is out of place, a piece of luggage is out of place, we will say something because that might be something dangerous. Explain to me how that we can walk past something happening in our office space, something happening in our formation where we can't say something, and that involves another human's safety. It might be their psychological safety as opposed to the physical safety. In some cases, I do believe it bleeds over into physical safety.
Right.
But how can you not say something or have policies in place as simple as if you see something, say something? If we can do that and worry about extremists, we can do that and worry about racist, sexist, ageist people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Organizational policies, organizational leadership policies, very important.
I can't put it any better than that. I mean, that's awesome. But it takes so much courage. But if you see someone doing that, I mean, just to flip that on its head as well, if you see someone else, that empowers you. If you see a great leader demonstrating that, and this is kind of to my younger audience out there, when you see your leadership do something like that, take it to heart. If they're doing the right thing, number one, it's hard. It's hard to be courageous, but leaders that do things like this absolutely make a huge difference. And there are so many eyes watching you as a leader. Now, don't feel intimidated by that, but take it to heart that when you're doing the right thing, people watch and they see your courage. And oh, by the way, it makes that next generation even better. It doesn't end by one action, but every single pebble that we can throw and get out of the way helps the path for someone else. Chevy, if you can conclude this great episode and talk a little bit about some of the services that Military Mentors offers and where people can find you and contact you.
You can find us on all the major platforms as far as social media is concerned. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We have our own separate militarymentors.org pages. You can also Google us or search us on YouTube, and you'll see a number of videos and discussions and webinars and things that we've done that are uploaded there as well. So I think it's fairly easy to find us because we're the only one kind of floating around with that name and that the logo that we have that's red, white, and blue, just like America.
Awesome.
As far as what we can do for organizations, we can do a number of things custom tailored to your organization. So we can come in and we can do training. We can do different types of development for your organization that can look like some of the educational and structural interventions like I mentioned before. We can travel to your organization. We give keynotes. We give webinars. We do stuff from a distance. Obviously, through COVID, we were doing stuff from a distance beforehand because that's what we do. We can also create material for you. We have a number of guidebooks, toolkits, one-pagers if you kind of want things to advertise for your organization. We have a director of marketing that can connect with your director of marketing and help build a campaign around a mentor program. And we would love to connect with you if you're in a space where you maybe want to leverage some military leadership and leverage some of this art and science for us to come in and help you change your organization. Again, we're not just talking about military organizations. You can be a civilian organization. We have a client that's a Fortune 500 member right now that we work for that is focused around improving the veterans they have in their space. And we would love to do that, would help translate, help build connections between your veterans and your organization and the civilian leadership there as well. So we can do a number of things. Just know that it's custom tailored to you, and it will require you to do some work just as much as we are doing the work. And just find us on social media or find me specifically. I am the only Chevys cook on the planet. So if you Google my name, that is me. And my email hopefully will be in the show notes. It's just simply Chevy, like the car, Chevy, at militarymentors.org.
That's fantastic, Chevy. And we definitely will have this in the show notes, listeners. Thank you so much. What I really appreciate, not only about what you've done in creating this, and those of you who are small business owners, you definitely know what it means to hustle. Chevy has done this. He has been a proud husband, parent. He's been, and his story, by the way, you should check out some of the other podcasts. Phenomenal life story. He has been a brother, an adopted-ish, I'm not sure how you'd categorize that, but just the loving relationship that you have with, is it Mama J? Is that right?
That's right.
I got to give her a shout out. The loving relationship that you have with your family just shows the kind of effort that you put towards everything that you do. So thank you so much for taking time out. I definitely appreciate it. Folks, I can't think of ending this podcast a better way of saying we honor our veterans in so many different ways. Organizations and businesses that are out there that just maybe listening from anywhere around the world, but especially the United States, and you're not really sure how to honor your vets, this is a great way to do it. Contact Military Mentors. Definitely talk to Chevy, and he can show you how not to hemorrhage the veterans in your organization, but instead to honor the veterans, connect with those veterans because their experience and their leadership and knowledge, they come preloaded with this mentorship concept. It's crazy because we do that for those out there. So thank you for all that you've done through your consultancy, but also your leadership, Chevy. I really appreciate sharing this time with you today.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, I have always said that I think I move with a purpose, and I believe my purpose is I am purpose built to serve others. That's a phrase I would use, the little short phrase. And in talks like this with you and with the listeners that are out there, doing the stuff that I do as a service member, doing the stuff that I do as a nonprofit leader, allow me to serve others, allow me to continue along my purpose. So thank you for letting me get a little bit deeper in my purpose today with this podcast. And I look forward to connecting with folks out there if you so please.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.